everybody. It's Larry Vela, and I'm here with historical wargaming enthusiast Mike Travis, and we're here to talk about Team Yankee. This is a modern warfare wargame that is from Battlefront. Some of you may be familiar with Battlefront's huge and extensive World War II and recently kind of World War I and other offerings. But Team Yankee takes us into the 80s with the kind of classic East versus West, NATO versus Warsaw Pact, what if type of gaming at 15 millimeter. So right here we have the Team Yankee rulebook, and we are going to dive inside and let you guys see what Team Yankee is all about. All right, Mike, let's take a look at what we have here. We have Team Yankee. This is the core rulebook. This is letting us fight World War III in the 80s. This is the what if scenario for NATO versus Warsaw Pact. This book, just some quick basics on it. It's hardcover, obviously. It's full color, and we are at about 120 pages. So, and this book does have everything that you need to get into Team Yankee gaming. So you get some background of kind of setting up what is this world and what's going on. You get all the core rules that you need to play. You get 2 sample army lists in there, both for the Americans and the Soviet Union, and then you get a little hobby section at the end. So everything, it is an all-inclusive. You buy the one book and you get miniatures and you're ready to go. So let's kind of go through it. All right, first thing. For anyone who is below the age of 30, you're probably unfamiliar with this map. This is what is called what we all grew up with back in the olden days, the classic old world map.
And when people talk about first world, second world, and third world, people don't honestly remember where those terms came from. This here in the blue, and the United States and a couple of other countries, that constituted NATO and its allies. That was the first world. The Soviet Union was the second world. Well, not the Soviet Union, but the Warsaw Pact and all of its substituent countries, but they were all ultimately answerable to the Soviet Union.
All of the satellite states.
And that was your second world. And then everybody else was just considered third world because they weren't part of either alliance.
Of the 2 major alliances. And what what we have here is the general map, and then the very start of the book is going to give you your 5 or 6 pages of explaining. Here's the little alternative history of kind of how World War III gets started, and all the press releases. Here's our table of contents. We're going to go over this, give you kind of some basics. So we're going to have the Cold War heats up, and basically how does World War III happen? That's the first 5 or 6 pages of the book. Then you get into playing Team Yankee. This is the actual rules themselves. And the interesting thing is, so these are starting roughly page 15, 16, and they end over here in the 70s. So this entire rule set from start to finish, about 60 pages.
Yep.
It's very. This is not the 250 plus pages that you see.
It's tremendously lean compared to your standard Flames of War.
Exactly. So they have really cut the rule set down. I mean, by a staggering amount to make this game easy to learn, easy to play, fast moving.
And yet the depth of gameplay looks roughly the same.
Yeah,
having watched it being played.
After your main rule set, you're going to get about 5 or 6 pages on how you construct armies, and then you're going to get the 2 army lists. So you have your 2 main factions. You have your United States forces over here, and then you have your Soviet forces. Then you get about roughly 10 pages of your core missions that you're going to be playing in the game. Some scenarios, and then you get a hobby section. You get about 10 pages on the back of how do you assemble miniatures, what are miniatures, how do you paint these things up, what did the U.S. Army look like in the 80s, what does the Soviet Army look like in the 80s, all those things that youngsters might not know. So let's keep on going. Gonna go quickly through. We're not going to show you every page in here, so we're going to be skimming. So you have your couple pages of really awesome maps. You get all of your alternative history of how do you go from the Cold War to an actual war between East versus West.
And I think one of the coolest parts about Team Yankee is that whole thing of You didn't have to just grow up in the 80s. You just have to put yourself in the perspective of what it was like then, that the major powers of the world spent tons of money, tons of manpower, built, developed an incredible amount of technology for fighting a war that never actually happened.
Right.
And this is the most expensive war never fought in
Right.
human history.
And
It's kind of cool to think about what would happen if it happened. I mean, if it did actually happen, it would be utterly tragic and horrible. But to sort of play it out in a game is I think a very fun thing.
And you better believe that from the end of World War II through the fall of the Soviet Union, this war was played out in military academies on both sides endlessly by generations of soldiers and generals for 60 years.
Absolutely, and also played out through some proxies. Afghanistan and Vietnam and so many other conflicts we had were honestly sometimes just testing beds to see how well our tactics and technology worked.
Mm-hmm. So that gets us through there, and now we're talking about the actual game itself. Flip over here, and let's take a look at the game. So we get some basics, unit definitions. Now we're into the actual rules, and this is where you definitely will start to see us doing lots of comparisons between Team Yankee and Flames of War, because the rules are at a 10,000 foot level, they're almost identical. It's the same phases, the same sub-phases. It's a very, very similar game. It's clear that this game is built on top of this game, but they basically said, let's go through the Flames of War rule set that's approximately 250 pages, and they said, how do we make that, how do you get the experience of playing Flames of War in a rule set that's a fifth the size?
Yep.
And that's pretty much what Team Yankee is. So you get, all your definitions of units. You get your definitions of what do unit cards look like. Again, anyone who's seen Flames of War, it's not identical, but you're gonna pick it up almost immediately.
Yeah. Veterans of Flames of War will pick up this rule set very seamlessly at pretty much every level.
Mm-hmm. You get all the basics. We're gonna go over your basic turn sequence. It is right here. You have your starting step, your movement step, shooting, assault. There's your commanders. You have all of your pretty pictures of what how to set up your boards and how you define terrain.
Which, if you've never played a Flames of War game before, understanding terrain and how it's defined and what it does is one of the core things you need to know.
Mm-hmm. First thing you're going to be noticing as you're looking through through all these diagrams, if you're used to Flames of War, is doesn't it look like these models are really big? Doesn't this tank look like it's really big compared to this house? And it's not that the house is of a different scale.
The houses didn't get smaller.
The houses have not gotten smaller. It's that since for all you people who are used to what 15 millimeter looks like in World War II, it's that all of the tanks and equipment in the modern era, in the near modern era compared to World War II, is substantially larger.
Yes.
Way substantially larger. So when you're playing this game, you're moving some beefy miniatures around when you're not talking about infantry.
Yeah.
You have all your movement, same thing. This is a chart that will be completely familiar to all of you Flames of War players. This is the how does it affect your speed and what kind of checks do you make with different types of vehicles on different types of terrain. So all those basics. Something that will be new and exciting in Team Yankee for people who are used to the World War II setting, which is helicopters. Helicopters are a big major part of all the army lists on all sides. They're and they have a lot of interesting roles because they can be you have gunships, but you also have troop transports.
Yeah, they don't all play the same role. You have the ability to drop troops, you have the ability to engage infantry, you have the ability to engage tanks, and every helicopter is completely different in terms of which of those roles it is actually proficient at or carries out at all.
Right, and helicopters are also really, really interesting because I've always there's always that kind of, first we're playing a war game, and of course there's a suspension of disbelief. It's not real life. We're playing a game, but lots of games that are out there from various manufacturers always try to shoehorn airplanes into games, and you get those weird things where it's a small table and there's maybe a couple dozen guys and they're fighting it out, and then you have bombers or strategic artillery or things that really have no place on a very small battlefield. But they shoehorn them into the game because it looks cool. People want to buy those models. I understand it, but it was always a stretch. But when you're dealing with a game at 15 millimeter, first of all, you have a lot more space, so it makes more sense to have kind of those bigger picture military units. But helicopters fit really well because helicopters hover. These are aircraft that make sense to be part of your games at a tactical level.
Absolutely, and especially in this kind of World War III scenario, where attack helicopters are not just for strategic purposes. In fact, they don't fulfill that role. They fulfill tactical purposes. They're for engaging tanks, enemy infantry platoons and squads, and the same is similar actually with some of the faster aircraft, the fixed-wing aircraft you see in this game. A-10s, those are for engaging tank columns, and that's the role they carry out in this game.
Right. So even the fast movers, you're not seeing strategic bombers, and you're not seeing F-15s and things that are just fast movers that are just that would be here and gone. You're seeing the dedicated ground attack aircraft.
Absolutely.
Which is very cool.
Yeah, and we're also seeing the kind of anti-aircraft assets that, or equipment that these different powers would bring to bear against those kinds of forces. Say we have the Shilka on the Soviet side being brought to bear against the U.S.
Huey gunships and things like that.
Well, the Cobras, I think, is what. Yeah,
Yep.
And also against the A-10s. So we're seeing sort of a more realistic approach to how aircraft was used or would have been used in these scenarios, and that's kind of neat. Kind of a departure away from sort of bringing this bomber that in reality would wipe out an entire company. Right.
In one pass.
Kill like 5 guys on your miniature battlefield.
Getting over here into the shooting phase, same thing. These. Here's the overall sequence for the phase. Very familiar. If you played Flames of War, it's all going to make sense. You're checking range. You're checking line of sight. You're declaring your targets. You're making your rolls. Enemies are getting saves. Here's your A-10 and your Cobra and a Russian.
And a Shilka.
And a Shilka waiting to shoot it down. That is the Soviet dedicated anti-aircraft vehicle. So we'll kind of just flip through, basically through shooting. Artillery. There are rules for artillery. There is indirect fire, and you're going to get some pretty big, chunky artillery pieces. There's the huge artillery template that you kind of place on areas and just nail everything under there. Again, similar mechanic to smoke bombardments, similar mechanic to what we see in Flames of War. All the rules for assault. Assault is probably, I just wanted to make a special note, this is one of the sections where I think you're going to see the most streamlining maybe in the entire game, because just really, really quickly, I want to point this out. We're on page 57 here. The assault rules right here. And the assault rules stop on page 63. So 6-7 pages. That's assault. In Flames of War, what do we have there? The assault section is probably, it is one of the largest, most complicated.
It is very large.
Taking a quick look.
Starts on page 141, ends on page 170. So really 29.
Yeah, so 30 pages, 6 pages, and that is exactly the type of thing. So this is a game that, like I said, some people, this is a incredibly approachable way to get into historical gaming. If you think it's cool, if if you want to, if you love tanks and infantry and history and all that kind of stuff, but you want a game that you and your friends can get into quickly. You're going to be up and playing it fast. It's not going to, you're not going to be learning to be a CPA, trying to go through the rules. Team Yankee is, this is your game. We're going to quickly go past assault. There's a bunch of kind of odd specialist rules in the back, so how to deal with minefields, night fighting, stuff like that. These are Su-25s. This is the Russian version of the A-10. This is their dedicated ground attack aircraft, which is actually, it is the Sturmovik, which is named after the Sturmovik from World War II, because it fills the exact same role. And again, the Russian Air Force uses this plane to this day. Mm-hmm. There, so kind of, you know, as the United States uses the A-10, we just both Air Forces said we should build an airplane that's really low tech and super sturdy, and there's no frills, and it just gets the job done. It flies really low and shoots stuff on the ground, and somehow, like 40 years later, shockingly, those airplanes are still in good shape, and both sides still use them.
And whatever we've tried to do to replace them, it's just never happened.
Keeps failing. Yeah. Special abilities. So we're done with the rule set now. We're on page 72. You get a couple pages on force construction. This is basically how do you build an army? What do the rules work? Same thing, really similar to. In fact, it's almost identical to Flames of War. So you're gonna, you get all of the rules for all you Flames of War players that you're used to. You'll say, here's a battalion, and it'll tell you have an HQ unit and it's mandatory. And then you have gray boxes, which are optional, and black boxes, which are mandatory. And you get all your different types of units, and then you buy whatever miniatures you want to, put them together into the units, and make a legal force, and off you go.
And one of the things I think that's really neat about Team Yankee is how you get your support units. You see over here we have our tank division force organization, and the main army, the main force that you choose from, comes from one of these forces that are directly beneath the division, but then your support is actually drawn from these options, these grayed out options down here. So you notice, so you look in this force org for your T-72 tank battalion, you don't see any of your air support or any of your artillery there because it all comes from here. This is where you get it. And everybody that uses either of these forces has access to those same support options.
Right. But you do get them in relatively small amounts too.
That is also true.
So it kind of it's that whole structure of yes, at a divisional level you have all these exotic pieces of equipment, but they're not just going to give you all of them.
No, you're never going to find them in the same
right.
engagement altogether.
Which is a nice balancing force within each faction. So every player is going to have access to all the cool toys. You just can't have all the cool toys at the same time. Just gonna have to pick. And then we get into the actual armies themselves. So two main armies, we'll flip through these briefly. So we're going to start off with the United States. I have no doubt that both of these forces are going to be receiving other books in the future that are going to give them many more units and lots more variety, but this book is all about one-stop shopping. So you're going to get your basic usable force to get you up and running. And for the United States, your main kind of formation is going to be you have your M1 Armored Combat Team, so this is your tanks. If you want tanks, here you go. You have an HQ tank, you have some Abrams platoons, and then you have a little and then a small amount of backup of kind of things based on the M113 APC platform that the United States has had since Vietnam, I believe. I don't think it goes back as far as Korea. And we'll flip through a couple of these. Here's an M1 tank platoon. There's mortars, an anti-aircraft platoon, which is an M113 with an anti-aircraft turret atop it. Here's your actual infantry. So there is your that is your M113 with dudes. Artillery. Here is your air support, which we talked about. So you have your more fast-moving A-10 Warthog fighter. This is a dedicated air-to-ground platform, and then you have your Cobra attack helicopters, and then we are done. So as you can tell clearly, there's a lot of stuff that's missing. I'm sure it's going to be coming later. Like where are the transport helicopters, things like that. There's definitely things that are going to be coming.
So in World War II, everybody used a wide variety of equipment because equipment evolved constantly across the war. You'll see a little bit less variety in Team Yankee just because everybody already has a set doctrine, everybody already has set technology, and they very slowly phase out old technology with new technology as they want to replace things. So you don't see as many different things. You don't see the wide variety of tanks. You don't see the wide variety of equipment that you would see in the World War II scenario, where things just rapidly evolved one after the other.
Right. And as I was saying, I have no doubt, we're just covering what's in this book here. I have no doubt that in the future, Battlefront will probably be putting out expansions with, they will only be making more and more equipment.
Oh, absolutely. And you have,
on to the Soviets. We have the Red Banner tank divisions and the Soviet mainstay, which is the T-72 main battle tank. Here's how you do it. These things, as we've seen in a similar doctrine in the 80s that we saw even in World War II, which is that these tanks they're good, they're solid, it's a rugged piece of equipment, they're cheap, and they're going to be using them in very large numbers.
Absolutely.
Probably, look for in an average game, you're probably if you're NATO, you're going to be probably 2-to-1 outnumbered at a minute.
Absolutely, and then the points values, if you compare them, and just in this book alone, it'll reflect that.
Mm-hmm. There is the ZSU 23-4 Shilka. This is the Soviet anti-aircraft platform, a very effective anti-aircraft platform. They also have SAM launchers, so that's surface-to-air missiles. So as opposed to the Shilka, which just has a huge amount of radar-guided machine guns, this the Gopher fires missiles. The BMP motor rifle platoon. This is mounted infantry. So this is kind of the mainstay of the Soviet army, really, which is infantry mounted in their transports. And then those transports have a huge amount of different variations on them. So there's the default one that carries guys. Then they said, let's make a slightly better version of it that has a missile on it, or ones that have a gun that can let them engage light armor. So there's just 101 different variants of what they did with the BMP chassis. Kind of a hallmark back to World War II. It's definitely not the World War II the literal same thing, but it's the classic Soviet. Let's just put a huge missile rack on the back of a truck.
Yes, and the BM design has never gotten old with now the Russians even still use the BM design as sort of a cornerstone of their artillery doctrine, even now.
And then we have Soviet air power. So there's the Su-25 Frogfoot. That is their dedicated ground attack aircraft. You get the honestly very well designed and excellent Mi-24 Hind. I don't know how that's supposed to be pronounced.
It's Hind because it's the NATO designation.
Assault helicopter, which is a big beef. It's kind of the classic Soviet helicopter. If you've ever watched any movie ever, that's the one you're going to see. They do have a lot, but this is the classic one. It is actually a pretty large, beefy helicopter. It can carry a very large amount of ground attack weaponry, and is a transport helicopter, so it can carry a full squad as well. So it's a very flexible. It's used in Soviet doctrine in a lot of different ways. It's both used in squadrons as a dedicated just attack force, and they can also use it to get elite squads of guys in and out of where they need to go.
Absolutely, it has been the workhorse helicopter of the Soviet military in terms of attack helicopters, and it's a testament to that is they still use it.
Yeah, to this day. And then at the back of the book, we're going to get a section of missions, because obviously you want to be having your missions, some scenarios, and then at the back of it, as we mentioned, you have your hobby section. So how to paint Soviet forces, how to paint United States forces, and then the very back of the book is your whole summary. This is a very similar layout to what we see in Flames of War, but obviously substantially cleaned up and streamlined. And that is it. 120 pages, Team Yankee, and we'll be right back. All right, everybody, that was Team Yankee from Battlefront Games, and this is Mike. It is how much?
$25.
$25. That is crazy. This is, this is everything you need. This is the base. This is the main game. All the rules are in it. You get sample army lists for the Americans and for the Soviet Union. Yeah, it's a full cover hardback book, $25. Which, as everyone knows, if you are in any way in this hobby and you love any of these types of games, miniatures or whatever, that's just a crazy price point. So if you're in any way interested, give Team Yankee a shot. And thanks for watching.
Thank you.